Tonight, major fracture on the front of organized labor ahead of crucial negotiations for pay rise, with two giant unions slagging it out in public.
To some, the threat of nationwide strike by the TUC contradicts the 1st March 2020 Kwao Declaration. We are unable to collaborate with the TUC Ghana in the celebration of this year's May Day.
We have the latest as the Clocksack takes on TUC, accusing it of unfairness in negotiations. Also tonight, Clocksack refused to call off a strike despite the head of the local government service announcing an agreement had been reached to pay the neutrality allowance in the last quarter of the year.
Unequivocal that it was not party to such decision and disassociates itself from such threats. It must be emphasized that Clocksack is a registered union and has the right to bargain for its constituents. So if you don't understand, what? Go and sleep. Agbena.
This is Top Story with Evans Mensah.
And Top Story is always brought to you by Vodafone. It's also brought to you by Prime Insurance. They are entering a crucial period of negotiations, long negotiations that will end, as they hope, with a significant hike in their wages. First up is the tripartite committee negotiation, and second is negotiations that will lead to an improvement in their base pay. But tonight, there is a major fracture on the front of organized labor that may jeopardize presenting a united front before employers and government. And it's crucial because two giants on the labor front, the TUC and Clocksack, tonight, they are slagging it out in the public with accusations and counter-accusations. The TUC appears to have incurred the wrath of Clocksack, that is the Association of Civil and Local Government Staff, in the wake of their fight, Clocksack's fight over the payment of outstanding neutrality allowance. As you know, Clocksack is currently on strike because government hasn't paid the allowance for the last 3 months. Well, in the wake of the controversy, the TUC went public, insisting that their members from 36 other public sector institutions also deserved some of the neutrality allowance, a 20% compensation that will have been paid to civil servants and local government staff belonging to Clocksack for remaining politically neutral. This is the TUC's Director of Research making the case that if Clocksack is going to get that amount and government agreed to give them, that the TUC also deserves same.
It's important that those whose rights have been suspended and who are being compensated with a neutrality allowance, we make it comprehensive. And here I have a list. The Electoral Commission, they are not supposed to do politics. Our members are there. They ought to be compensated with neutrality allowance. The National Media Commission, the National Commission for Civic Education. If I have about 36 of such institutions in the public sector that are not members of Clocksack, that are our members, and in the interest of fairness, this neutrality allowance ought to apply to them, and we will make sure that it applies to them. That one, you can take my word for it.
Well, today, the Clocksack president and the union itself had been addressing a press conference on the issues, and they went public, taking on the TUC for allegedly putting up bad faith in the last few weeks, indeed, on this matter and other issues. The TUC had announced it would be demanding a 19% increment in worker salaries, but Executive Secretary of Clocksack, Dr. Isaac Bampado, says the demand is just a facade.
Unequivocal that it was not party to such decision and disassociates itself from such threats. It must be emphasized that Clocksack is a registered union and has the right to bargain for its constituents on its own terms. In reality, this has been the focus of Clocksack in channeling its activities and the common good of its members. To some, the threat of nationwide strike by the TUC contradicts the 1st March 2020 Power Declaration, when some of the sections of the community stated, as referred, the 14, improve coordination between Fair Wages and Salaries Commission and the Ministry of Finance and all other relevant agencies to determine clearly annual wage baskets allowed for negotiations. This means that there is a limit to the quantum of money for negotiations, and this will be determined by the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission and then the Ministry of Finance. The declaration was signed by the TUC on the blind side of other unions. The TUC is throwing dust into the eyes of workers. Considering the period for 2023 salary negotiations, and that will be part of 2023 budget statement, these expectations are unattainable or unachievable per the declaration that the TUC signed. The civil and local government staff of Closer, Ghana regrets that due to the recent unfortunate developments on the labor front, we are unable to collaborate with the TUC Ghana in the celebration of this year's May Day. The association will independently organize activities in all the 16 regions of the country, not the 10 regions, in commemoration of this important landmark in the annals of workers' struggle.
So that's you just heard the head of CLOCSAC, the Association of Civil Servants and Local Government Staff, there taking on the TUC on issues of what he alleges to be bad faith in negotiations that has happened in the past. But what has obviously triggered this appears to be the recent fight over the neutrality allowance, which appears to have been the final straw that broke the back of the camel, forcing the CLOCSAC to go public with their issues. Because as you heard earlier there, the CLOCSAC had gone public to demand neutrality allowance, and TUC goes public to say, in essence, well, if you're paying CLOCSAC, then you have to pay the rest of our members as well. So that's where we are with the issues. But what about the substantive matter of the neutrality allowance? CLOCSAC is still on strike, by the way, and they've declared today that they are not going to call off the strike. And this is in spite of negotiations that have been happening for the last 1 week or so with government on the back of the demand for the neutrality allowance to be paid. Just last night on PM Express, I spoke to the head of local government service, Dr. Nana Athuata, who announced that actually an agreement had been reached in negotiations with CLOCSAC yesterday about the payment of the neutrality allowance, and he was expectant that today CLOCSAC will call off the strike.
I must admit, we've all agreed that it is a bit controversial. For that matter, the government, with her engagement with the CLOCSAC executive, in the presence of myself and the head of civil service and others, did indicate that controversial terminology, that controversial nomenclature, neutrality, doesn't sit well with government. And for that matter, the last Friday that we met, government has come out to say, yes, we are okay to go with the allowance, the percentage increase, but we are not going to go with that nomenclature. To go back, let's sit down, look at how we're going to christen it. But we are committed to give you civil service staff, local government service staff, that allowance. That was the first thing that we agreed upon. Number two, the government is saying that CLOCSAC, the economic challenges that we are facing. Yes, although we signed a memorandum of understanding with you that that allowance was going to be implemented effective February. We cannot. We are pleading with you. Understand the situation that we are in today, and that we're going to start at the last quarter of the year, beginning October. And thankfully, the CROSAC executive agreed. And so, as we speak now, the agreement is that instead of February 2022, it is going to take effect from October 2022. That was what we all agreed upon last Friday. However, what was left was that the Minister for Employment and Labor Relations, who chaired the negotiation, was to write to the Minister of Finance.
You heard him just say that the CROSAC agreed to this. In fact, he goes on to say that he was confident that the strike will be called off today. Well, yes, CROSAC called for a press conference, but instead of calling off the strike, they said actually that there's no agreement, and so the strike will persist. This is the Executive Secretary of CROSAC, Dr. Isaac Bampado.
At the negotiation table, it's not done in the media. It's done at the negotiation table. That's where we do justification for whatever allowances. And that's according to the labor laws of Ghana. We went to negotiations. The government team was led by the master strategist of the government, Honorable Osafo Maf, with his personal assistants. We had Finance Ministry there represented by Abina, the Deputy Minister of Finance, with his technical people. Fair Wages and Salaries Commission were there. They brought two lawyers, plus their technical team. Employment was there. And of course, CROSAC was there, led by my good self. Now, so if you people are saying that we have outwitted and played a fast one on them, it's negotiation. Then we should be congratulated for doing a good job. Because that's what negotiation is all about. And mind you, this neutrality allowance data is only a minute part of our broader conditions of service. There are more goodies that we've already finished about 80%. We don't do double work. We've got to justify at the negotiating table, and then some people are asking questions. We don't do double work. Me, I don't do double work. If you want to do double work, you can go and do double work. But we don't do double work. We've justified whatever allowances that we've been given at the negotiating table. It's signed and sealed. Signed and sealed. So if you don't understand, what? Go and sleep. Go and sleep. Go and sleep. Agbena. Agbena. Agbena.
So that's CROSAC members there. You may have noticed that they've managed to grind the public services to a halt. If you go to any of the public sectors right now trying to get a service, you would meet an empty space because they are still on strike there. But this is all in this backdrop of this very public fight now between CROSAC, a very, very big union, between themselves and TUC at a time, crucial time, when you're going into tripartite negotiations that then will go into negotiations over base pay. Let's bring in labor consultant, Mr. Austin Game. Mr. Game, thank you for your time here on Top Story.
You're welcome.
You have done this for so long. You've experienced, labor agitations. You've consulted. Have you seen this very public disagreement between two giant labor unions, the TUC being a matter of law, and a big one like CROSAC before?
Yes, thank you. We have witnessed some before, but this is on another scale, and I think that is cause for sober heads to be able to have it resolved. And it can be done. It can be done. I have confidence in the two parties. If they want it resolved, they can resolve it.
I mean, the allegations that the Clocksack executive secretary is making, it appears to be a very serious allegation. It talks about negotiations and that the TUC had gone in and made and agreed on things without consulting them. They didn't know about it, and that this is unfair. It's been bad faith, and the consequences that they are not participating. They're breaking away from the joint participation of the May Day, and they're going to do their own thing. How serious does it make it? Looking at the allegations that there's been leveled now against the TUC.
It's serious, to be honest. It's serious, but it's not unsurmountable. Fortunately, both of them are good people. They know exactly what to do, how they can mend their fences. If they need help, they know what to do. So obviously, it's been there. I mean, labor rift has always been there. There are some ongoing now before this has come to the open. So yes, it can always be triggered. It can always be resolved.
But within the context of the impending tripartite committee negotiation, just today the technical committee of the tripartite committee was inaugurated. They're going to start the work, then they'll move into negotiations for base pay. Considering the time you're in, how bad is it then in terms of presenting a united front at the negotiating table in a front of employers and government?
It's bad, and if I were to be, I'm not too sure that government, as part of the tripartite machinery, itself will be happy. If I were to be in their shoes, I would find a way of getting the two sides to be united, because then they, government as employer, also will be the loser, because they will have to satisfy here and satisfy the other part. And the consequences are very, very offending to the other stakeholders in the country. So I think that it's important, if I were to be in the shoes of the Minister of Employment and Labor Relations, there will be no sleep. They will have to find ways and means of getting the two giants together to have a good conversation and resolve their differences and get along. Otherwise, the nation will be the loser.
Really? I mean, if you're negotiating with somebody who wants more and that person comes to the table divided, don't you exploit that?
Unfortunately, it will not be exploited, because the TUC, let's call it TUC, and its direct affiliates themselves are a giant. And therefore, you cannot take advantage of them in any way possible. Closac is a very huge animal on its own, and therefore, if you don't take care and you want to exploit, you will end up being exploited yourself as a government. So it makes sense for them to think outside the box and take the necessary steps now. If I were to be in their shoes, there will be no sleep today.
So that's a substantive point. And as we wake up this morning, there was an expectation, at least from Dr. Nana Tuatha, head of the local government, that they will call off the strike. That hasn't happened. He announced yesterday that the agreement had been reached. Well, Clocksack says no agreement, strike continues, all over neutrality allowance. And it appears what seemed to have, the straw that has broken the back of the camel is TUC going public to say, well, if you're giving them neutrality allowance, then our 36 public sector unions that also belong to us also give them, and that has led to a rift. This neutrality allowance is splitting heads. Government on one side, now even the labor unions are fighting over it. How does government go about resolving this? Because as we know, if you go to public service right now, the places are empty.
As I was listening to you and Nana, Dr. Atuata, and the IDEG gentleman yesterday, I was just laughing and praying that you see through it. But I took notice that you did not see it, that it will not work that way. And lo and behold, what I was thinking about came to pass today, because the way they were mumbling with words when he was contributing created the impression, knowing what this thing can be, that there is no solution, and that he was hoping on assumption that all will be well. It didn't go that way. They should have concluded and have an agreement signed properly so, then you can use it as a kite, even if it's going to be a kite. And here you are, you did not reach any firm conclusion, and you now even said the Minister of Employment, if I heard them well, was going to write to the Ministry of Finance. I don't lead negotiation like that. The Minister of Employment and Labor Relations is the chief coordinator of everything. Therefore, the Minister of Finance or his representative who has authority must sit by his side to concur before they come to conclusion on anything. The matter should not be over on assumption that Minister of Finance will now give an okay to it. No, Minister of Employment don't work like that. They must give that ministry. If you play with that ministry, your government can collapse.
And very finally on this, he also announced yesterday that the government agrees the nomenclature neutrality allowance is controversial, so they will change it. He doesn't know yet what name they will give it, but it will be changed. But the amount will still be paid. Is that a solution?
That's precisely what I was saying. That as I was listening to you clearly yesterday, my fear was heightened because first of all, they should not have gone to the meeting with that mindset. And was there something represented in the budget of 2022 before you went to put pen to paper and say you have agreed to a neutrality? What is neutrality? The people are apolitical already. So you don't have anything called neutrality. Neutrality is in language. So we don't use that. Unfortunately, they muddied the waters, and now people are lashing onto it. And so they have themselves to blame. Just as we introduced market premium, it has created problem and remained unresolvable. The same thing had been created now. They have to live with the consequence, but they should be mindful of the fact that there are millions and millions who will be affected by their actions if they do it.
Mr. Gambe, thank you for your time here on Top Story. Well, something also happened at the press conference I want to bring to your attention. I mean, if you may have noticed, when we broke the story about the neutrality allowance on Top Story last week, we spoke to Franklin Kujo, who is the founding president of Imani Africa. And he was first to criticize the whole arrangement of the neutrality allowance. And since then, it appears that Clarkson had noticed and had decided to single him out for some fair bit of verbal abuse. It came up again today at a press conference. Parker, what happened?
So, Evan, he made the point, the executive director of Clarkson made the point that since they demanded the neutrality allowance, some individuals, including Franklin Kujo and others, have been criticizing them for their demands, and that they are serving a warning. Anyone who wakes up to protest against the neutrality allowance, in his words, they will pepper them.
We inject him like that. We inject, and if he wakes up again, we'll smear him with pepper in all his body parts. Oba will stop. Oba will stop.
But that's a threat to his life. I mean, what?
I say Oba will stop.
No, but if you say you inject,
Oba will stop. Oba inject. I don't can take it. It's talking. It's also talking. Whatever speed you can give it. Okay. You get Oba will stop. We'll pepper him.
So that there is the executive secretary of Clocksack there, detailing what they'll do to Franklin Kujo. If indeed he doesn't back down, one is giving him lagating and peppering him. I wonder what that really means. Mr. Kujo, thank you for your time here on Top Story.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Are you ready
Thanks
for your
to Mr. Bumpo wherever he is? Dr. Bumpo wherever he is.
Are you ready for your lagating and pepper?
Very interesting, isn't it? Let me just tell Mr. Bumpo, I can shake the quick. I think the times we are in also calls for this type of relief sometimes. There are many serious issues happening, and I do take the issues seriously. I'm just saying that I do not think the christening of the ask, the neutrality allowance, makes sense because they are already neutral, as Mr. Gambe just said to you. And I think I don't want to repeat myself. as we are now being told that the government is contemplating changing the name, maybe that will sit well with people. But they should have even been the first to say that, look, we, by our existence, we are neutral. So let's not even give it the tagline, neutrality allowance. That's what we are saying. Nobody is quarreling with them concerning their conditions of service. And indeed, I must admit that there's general price increases in the country. Inflation is almost 19%. And if organized labor is asking for a raise, they are well within their limits to ask for that. But to take the issue of neutrality, which defines the existence of the civil service, and negotiate on that basis, that obviously was what got the ire of many people, including myself. And I think that, yes, I listened to them, I went to sleep, but many more others were angrier. And so they've got a lot of people to deal with. So, Mr. Babu, just let me tell you that, it was your Caesar who said in one of his comments about fear, that danger knows full well that Caesar is more dangerous than he. We are two lions littered in one day, and I the elder, and more the terrible. I'm just saying that I'm immune to legating and pepper.
And I guess I hear you say you haven't backed down from your initial position you expressed when we broke the story last week.
Oh, not at all. I don't think, I'm sure in their own heart of hearts, they would have had cause to say that, look, we probably were wrong in giving this thing name called neutrality. Of course, they can't back down publicly right now because there's a tag to it, there's a percentage, there's some monetary value to that. That must find a place and must be given. Of course, keeping in line with the times we are all in. That's why I said that general discussions about remuneration and welfare is important, but to give it a tagline, they should have been the first group to say that, look, we are already neutral, and we cannot be asking for neutrality allowance because that would just make people angry. But again, they managed to open a Pandora's box, isn't it? Because the other unions are now saying that they will join the fray, which has now also caused another friction. I do not envy government at all, but I suspect that they must find some solution to this sooner than later. Otherwise, they'll have themselves to blame.
I'm grateful, Franklin Kujo, the man who is immune to lagatin and pepper.
We'll inject him lagatin. And if he wakes up again, we'll smear him with pepper in all his body parts. Oba will stop. Oba will stop.
But that's a threat to his life. I mean, what?
I say Oba will stop.
No, but if you say you inject,
Oba will stop. Oba inject. I don't can take it. It's talking. It's also talking. Whatever speed you can give it. Okay. If Oba will stop, we'll pepper him.